The scent of burnt coffee and despair clung to the air in the daily grind, a smell Amina knew better than her own name. It was the perfume of another Tuesday, another 12-hour shift that would barely cover the electric bill, let alone the rent notice folded into a tight, angry square in her apron pocket. She wiped down the stainless steel counter for the 10th time, the motion automatic, her mind a million miles away, calculating figures that never added up. The cafe was empty, a temporary mercy in the late afternoon lull before the evening rush. That was when the bell over the door chimed, a frail, delicate sound. An elderly Korean woman stood hesitating just inside the doorway, clutching a paper grocery bag that seemed too heavy for her small frame. She was impeccably dressed in a soft wool coat, her silver hair styled perfectly, but her eyes held a lost, uncertain quality that tugged at something in Amina's chest. Before Amina could offer a greeting, a college student, headphones blasting, barreled past the woman on his way out, his backpack catching the edge of her bag. The paper ripped. The contents spilled. Oranges rolled across the worn linoleum like scattered planets. A carton of eggs shattered, yellow yolk bleeding onto the floor. A bag of rice cakes skidded under a table. The student muttered a curse and was gone. The old woman just stood there, staring down at the mess, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Amina was moving before she even thought about it. She rounded the counter, her worn sneakers silent on the floor. "Hey, don't you worry about that," she said, her voice soft. "Let me help you." The woman looked up, her dark eyes surprised. She said something in Korean, a quiet, mournful phrase. "It's okay," Amina insisted, kneeling down. She began gathering the oranges, her fingers deftly avoiding the sticky egg yolk. She saw the woman's hands tremble as she bent to help, her knuckles frail and dotted with age spots. Together, in silence, they collected the scattered groceries. Amina found an empty box behind the counter and carefully packed everything that was salvageable. The rice cakes were fine. The oranges were bruised but whole. The eggs were a lost cause. When they were done, Amina guided the woman to a small table. "Please sit. Let me get you something. On the house." The woman shook her head, trying to protest, but Amina was already behind the counter, her movements efficient. She brewed a cup of fragrant jasmine tea, the steam a welcome warmth in the cool cafe. She placed it on the table with a small plate of shortbread cookies she knew her boss wouldn't miss. The woman took a sip, her hands cupped around the warm ceramic. She looked at Amina, a real, searching look. She spoke again, this time in slow, careful English. "You are kind." Amina just shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It was nothing. People should be better to each other." She started mopping up the egg, the chemical scent of the cleaner sharp and unpleasant. A few minutes later, the woman stood to leave. She reached into her purse, but Amina held up a hand. "No, please. It's fine." The woman paused, then gave a small, formal bow. Amina watched her walk out the door, her posture once again straight and dignified. A sleek, black sedan, the kind that looked like it cost more than the entire city block, purred to life at the curb and slid away into traffic. Amina shook her head, a fleeting thought about two different worlds crossing paths, and then went back to wiping down the counter. The rent notice in her pocket felt heavier than ever. The next morning, the world tilted on its axis. Amina was unlocking the front door of the cafe, the early morning air crisp and cool, when two black sedans pulled up to the curb, identical to the one from the day before. They parked in perfect, silent unison. For men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. They didn't look like security. They looked like predators in custom wool. One of them, clearly the leader with a severe haircut and an unreadable expression, walked directly toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his presence so intense it seemed to suck the air from around him. "Amina Roberts?" His voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. She swallowed, her hand still on the key in the lock. "Yes." He didn't smile. He didn't offer a name or an explanation. He simply stated a fact. "My employer wishes to speak with you." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The other three men stood like statues, blocking any path of escape, their eyes scanning the empty street. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. This was not about a cup of tea. This was about something else entirely, something vast and dangerous that had just washed up on the shore of her life. The ride was suffocatingly silent. Amina sat in the back of the lead sedan, sandwiched between two of the suited men. The car smelled of expensive leather and something else, something metallic and clean like steel. She stared out the tinted window at the familiar streets of her city blurring into an alien landscape. No one spoke. The driver navigated traffic with surgical precision, and the men beside her didn't so much as breathe in her direction. They were pieces of a machine, and she was the object being transported. They didn't take her to an office building or a police station. They drove to the city's most exclusive residential tower, a spire of glass and steel that scraped the sky. The car descended into a private underground garage, and she was escorted to a dedicated elevator that shot upwards without a single stop. The soft chime announcing their arrival at the penthouse floor sounded like a death knell. The apartment was less a home and more a statement of absolute power. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city sprawling below. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and cold. It was the kind of place where a single speck of dust would feel like a personal insult. And standing in the center of it all, silhouetted against the morning sun, was a man. He turned as she entered, and the breath caught in her throat. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his Tom Ford suit to perfection. His black hair was styled with a precision that matched his surroundings. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were dark, intelligent, and utterly empty of emotion. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only mar on an otherwise flawless, handsome face. He moved like the room owed him space. "Miss Roberts," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth as whiskey, but with an edge of broken glass. "I am Kwon Jinwoo." Amina found her voice, though it felt thin and reedy. "What is this? Why am I here?" "You showed my mother a kindness yesterday," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "A kindness she has not stopped speaking of." She was distressed. "You calmed her." His mother. The old woman from the café. It clicked into place with a sickening thud. This man, this empire of cold glass and steel, was her son. "It was nothing," she repeated, the same words she'd said to the woman herself. "I just helped her pick up her groceries." A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched his lips. "In my world, Miss Roberts, nothing is nothing. Every action has a weight, a value, a debt." He gestured to a sleek black briefcase on a glass table. One of his men opened it. It was filled with neat stacks of $100 bills. "This is a token of my family's gratitude. It should be enough to solve any minor financial inconveniences you may be experiencing." Amina stared at the money. It was more than she'd make in 5 years. It was a way out. It was freedom. And it felt like the dirtiest thing she had ever seen. The rent notice in her pocket, the one that had been her entire world yesterday, suddenly felt insignificant. She lifted her chin, meeting his cold gaze. "I don't want your money." For the first time, a flicker of something, surprise, maybe annoyance, crossed his face. "Excuse me?" "I said I don't want it," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "I helped your mother because she needed help. It wasn't a transaction. It was common decency. It's not for sale." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted. Jinwoo studied her, his head tilted slightly, like a hawk assessing strange prey. His men shifted, their posture tightening. No one refused Kwon Jinwoo. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic click echoed from the hallway leading to the private elevator. It was a small sound, almost nothing, but the effect was instantaneous. Jinwoo's entire demeanor changed. The cold observer vanished, replaced by a predator. In a single, fluid motion, he crossed the space between them, his hand gripping her arm, and pulled her behind him. His body was a solid wall of muscle and expensive fabric, shielding her completely. Sir, the lead bodyguard asked, his hand already inside his jacket. Seal the floor, Jin-woo commanded, his voice a low growl. He didn't look at his men. His eyes were fixed on the hallway, his body coiled like a spring. No one in or out. Amina's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the heat radiating from his back, smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, cedarwood, and something like cold night air. This was real. The danger she had only sensed before was now a living thing in the room with them. The moment of tension stretched, thin and taut, before one of his men returned from the hallway. False alarm, sir. Maintenance override on the service elevator. It's been dealt with. Slowly, the tension in Jin-woo's shoulders eased, but he didn't move away from her. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp and severe against the light. My mother is all I have left, he said, his voice quiet and raw, pitched only for her to hear. Her safety, and the safety of anyone connected to her, is not negotiable. In that unguarded statement, she heard it. The wound. The reason for this fortress of glass and men in suits. He wasn't just protecting his mother, he was atoning for a failure to protect someone else. He finally stepped away, putting a cool foot of distance between them, and the air rushed back into her lungs. The mask of indifference was back in place, but she had seen behind it. He looked at her, and his eyes were different now. He wasn't just seeing the cafe girl. He was seeing a complication. You will stay here, he said. It was not a question. Until I am satisfied that yesterday's incident was a coincidence and not a message. Stay here? I can't. I have a job, a life. Your job has been taken care of, he stated flatly. Your employer has been generously compensated for your indefinite leave of absence. Your life, for the moment, is here. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, trapped by an act of kindness. He saw the defiance in her eyes, the refusal to be intimidated. He stepped closer again, the space between them crackling with a strange energy. It wasn't just menace. It was something else. Something that felt dangerously like interest. You are in my world now, Amina, he said, using her first name for the first time. The way he said it was different. It sounded less like a name and more like a claim. The sooner you accept that, the safer you will be. The days that followed were a study in luxurious confinement. Amina had a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, with a closet filled with clothes in her size that had appeared as if by magic. She had any food she wanted, any book, any film. What she didn't have was a key, or a phone, or freedom. Jin-woo was a ghost in his own home. He would be gone for hours, sometimes days, and then reappear without a sound, a silent, brooding presence in the vast apartment. Their interactions were brief, formal, and charged with an unspoken tension. He would ask if she needed anything. She would say no. They would stare at each other for a beat too long, and then he would retreat to his office. She learned about his world in fragments. A hushed, angry phone call in Korean that she overheard from her room. The words unintelligible, but the tone lethal. The sight of one of his men with a fresh bruise on his jaw, his expression unbothered, as if it were a normal part of the job. She saw the city lights from her window and felt more isolated than ever before. This man didn't run a business. He ran an empire built on shadows and fear. Everything in her screamed to run, to find a way out. But a part of her, a foolish, curious part, was captivated. She saw the way he moved, the absolute control he had over himself and everyone around him. And she remembered the raw vulnerability in his voice when he spoke of his mother. One evening, he didn't come home. The silence in the penthouse was different. It was an empty, anxious silence. Amina found herself pacing, watching the headlights of the cars far below. The lead bodyguard, a man named Park, stood stoically by the elevator, his face a granite mask. Is he okay? She asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Park didn't look at her. The boss handles his own affairs. Jin-woo returned just before dawn. The elevator chimed and he walked in. His suit was still perfect, not a wrinkle on it, but a small, dark stain marred the pristine white of his collar. A fresh, angry red line was carved high on his cheekbone, just missing his eye. He looked exhausted, but his eyes burned with a cold fire. He saw her standing there, and for a moment, his control wavered. The sight of him, hurt and yet still standing, sent a jolt through her she didn't understand. It wasn't pity. It was a fierce, protective instinct that terrified her. He had survived something. He had almost been lost. He walked past her without a word and went into his office, closing the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place was like a wall being erected between them. The line had been crossed by his enemies. A few days later, she crossed one of her own. She was in the main living area when two of his men dragged another man into the room. He was one of their own, a lieutenant she recognized. His face was a mess of blood and bruises, his eyes wide with terror. They forced him to his knees before Jinwoo, who sat in a low armchair, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. "You spoke to the Cheon family," Jinwoo said. "It was a statement of fact. Boss, I swear." "You told them about the shipment schedule," Jinwoo continued, his voice dangerously soft. "The schedule that was changed at the last minute. The schedule I fed only to you." The man started sobbing, pleading in Korean. Amina couldn't understand the words, but she understood the sound of a man begging for his life. Jinwoo listened, his face impassive. Then he set his glass down on the table with a quiet, final click. He reached into his jacket. Amina's blood ran cold. She saw the cold, empty finality in his eyes. This was it. This was the monster behind the tailored suit. And she couldn't watch. She couldn't just stand there and watch him become that.
"Stop," she said.
The room went completely silent. Everyone, including the man on his knees, turned to look at her. Jinwoo's hand froze. He turned his head slowly, and the look he gave her could have frozen fire. "Leave us," he commanded his men. "But, sir..."
"Now."
The men hesitated, then dragged the traitor out of the room, leaving Amina alone with him. The air was thick enough to choke on. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice a low, threatening whisper. She took a step forward, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You can't just kill him." "I can," he said, rising to his feet. He was a tower of controlled fury. "And I will. In my world, betrayal is answered with blood. There is no other way." "There's always another way," she shot back, fueled by a reckless courage. "For a second, when you were about to do that, I didn't recognize the man who was so worried about his mother's safety he locked a stranger in his apartment." Her words hit him like a physical blow. The fury in his eyes warred with something else, something confused and raw. He stared at her, truly seeing her, and the space between them vibrated with a tension that had nothing to do with the traitor and everything to do with them. He took a step closer, crowding her space, his shadow falling over her. "You are a complication I cannot afford," he breathed, his voice rough. "A weakness. And yet, I find I am unwilling to remove you." It wasn't a confession of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was an admission of a truth he had been fighting, a truth she had become to him. The war for his empire, and for his soul, had just found its new front line. And it was standing right in front of him. The next day, she found out what it cost to be his weakness. A call came from Park. He handed the phone to Jinwoo, his face grim. Amina watched as the color drained from Jinwoo's face, replaced by a glacial rage. He hung up and looked at her. "They went after the cafe," he said, his voice flat and deadly. "They broke the windows. Painted a message on the wall." He paused, his jaw tight. "The message was your name." The floor dropped out from under her. Her world, her small, insignificant life, had been used as a weapon against him. The danger was no longer abstract. It had her name on it. Jinwoo made his plans with a chilling, silent efficiency. He was going to end the Cheon family, root and stem. It was a war council held in the penthouse, with maps spread across the glass table and his most trusted men speaking in low, urgent tones. He was sending her away. A private jet, a new identity, a life of quiet safety in Europe. You will leave tonight, he told her, his back to her as he stared out at the city. It's the only way to keep you safe. No, Amina said, her voice quiet but firm. He turned, his expression unreadable. This is not a negotiation. I'm not leaving, she insisted. They came after me. This is my fight now. 2. She had overheard something during their planning. A small detail about a secondary escape route the Cheon boss favored, a service tunnel beneath his restaurant. It was a piece of information they didn't have. I can help you. He looked at her, a long, searching gaze that peeled back every layer of her defenses. He saw not fear, but resolve. He saw that she meant it. The cost of involving her would be immense, but the cost of losing her was, he was discovering, unthinkable. He gave a single, sharp nod. The final confrontation was a symphony of controlled violence. Jinwoo moved through the chaos of the Cheon family's main restaurant with a lethal grace. Gunshots were muffled, precise. His men were a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Amina was where he had left her, in a secured car 2 blocks away with Park. But she had given him the key. The service tunnel. It was over in less than 10 minutes. A rival empire dismantled. In the ringing silence that followed, Jinwoo found her. He came back to the car, his suit still immaculate, not a drop of blood on him. He opened her door and simply looked at her. The noise of the city seemed to fade away. You should have been on that plane, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. You would be dead, she replied, her voice steady. He would have escaped. It was the truth, and they both knew it. He reached in, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of impossible tenderness from this man of steel and shadow. It was more intimate than any kiss. My world will destroy you, Amina, he whispered, the words a raw confession. Let it try, she whispered back. He offered it to her one last time, in the sterile quiet of the penthouse, with the city lights glittering like a carpet of fallen stars below. A new life. Money. Freedom from him, and the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. It was her choice. No guards, no lax. Just a decision. She looked at this man who commanded death and loyalty with a single word, and she saw the son who cherished his mother, the man who had shielded her with his own body, the soul who carried a wound he never spoke of. Her old life was gone, burned away the moment they painted her name on a wall. There was no going back to the girl worried about rent. Amina walked to the vast window, placing her palm against the cool glass. The city was spread out before her, a universe of possibilities. She could disappear into it, or she could claim her place in a new one. She felt him come to stand beside her, a warm, solid presence in the cool air of the room. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the question hanging in the space between them. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the weight of her choice. She didn't turn to look at him. She didn't have to. She just stayed, watching the endless stream of headlights below, 2 solitary figures against the glass, claiming the night as their own. She was no longer his prisoner. She was his equal. And in this dangerous, dark world, that was a power greater than any empire.